Hello, fellow Americans. This is Mr. Steffler. I'm coming to you from room 111, and I'm going to talk about how to do the national growth and regional growth test review. We're starting out with Section 1, Early Industry and Inventions, War of 1812, Effects on Manufacturing. First thing you need to do is you need to go to Section 1 of your chapter, War of 1812, Effects on Manufacturing. It says in this section that many Americans, such as Thomas Jefferson, did not want the United States to industrialize, but the War of 1812 led the country to this direction. Because of the British naval blockade kept imported goods from reaching U.S. shores, Americans had to start manufacturing their own goods. That's the answer. The War of 1812 led to manufacturing because they were unable to buy stuff from the British during the war. Number 2. Location of manufacturing in the early 1800s. Go back here. Factories come to New England. New England was a good place to set up factories for several reasons. You know the reasons: the water power, the willing labor force, the docks for ships to take the products all over the world. So that's the answer. Number 3, transportation improvements. What were the effects of transportation improvements? So I'm going to look here under where it talks about transportation. Moving people, goods, and messages. Transportation improvements. It says in 1811, the first steam trip traveled down the Mississippi River to Ohio, but its engine was not powerful enough to move upriver. Yada, yada, yada. It installed a double-decker boat that went on the Mississippi River and launched a new era of transportation. The transportation improvements also encouraged national unity by linking different distant places together, created larger markets for products, and made movement of people and products easier and cheaper. Question 4. Transportation connections between regions. Here we go right here. Actually, this answer is in Section 3. The Erie Canal allowed farm products from the Great Lakes region to flow east and people and manufactured goods to flow from the east to flow west. Trade stimulated from the canal helped New York City become the country's largest nation. Plantations and slavery. This portion right here, matching inventors and inventions, all you need to do is reference the start of your packet. That's where that information is. You need to make sure that that information is on your test reviews. Section 2, what are spirituals? What we're going to do is we're going to go into Section 2. Go right here. Singing spirituals offered comfort for pain, bound people together at religious meetings, and eased the boredom of daily task. Spirituals also sometimes secretly spread plans to escape. What are the effects of the cotton gin? We're going to go right here. It triggered a vast westward movement. It made cotton extremely valuable. And it encouraged Southerners to settle on Native American land.
Teachers, please excuse the interruption. Will you please send down a representative from your 6-hour class to pick up flyers to go home, please? Thank you.
Sorry for that interruption. Question 3, how did some African Americans resist being enslaved? We're going to go right to here. Families under slavery. We're going to look down here in the bottom after the story about Frederick Douglass's mother. And we're going to say that number one reason, or one way they resisted was by simply not accepting their dehumanization, staying in tight-knit groups and families, tight communities and religious communities. Another aspect is the possible running away to either visit families temporarily or running away to the north permanently. Or a third aspect is possibly violent revolution, such as done by Nat Turner. The next question. What are 3 facts in the books about African Americans in the South? So we're going to go here. Where it talks about African Americans in the South. We're going to say that about half of the African Americans lived on large plantations. About 8% of African Americans in the South were freedmen and women who mainly lived in cities. And we are also going to say that about 1/3 of the South's population, 33%, were African American. Moving on to the next question. How many slaves did the majority of white Southerners own? The answer to this question is none. The majority of white Southerners, 2/3 of white Southerners, owned 0 slaves. Moving along to nationalism and sectionalism. 2 important facts about how the United States acquired Florida. Number 1 would be that Andrew Jackson had a major role in us getting Florida. That is in here. Andrew Jackson had a major role in us getting Florida. And another aspect to us getting Florida is that it's an example of nationalism, that we were able to expand our borders into the South even further and drive out the Spanish. Next question. What is the Missouri Compromise? The Missouri Compromise is here. And basically it was Clay's plan to keep the balance of slave states and free states the same. Missouri being added as a slave state and Maine being added as a free state. The big story in the Missouri Compromise, though, is the fact that states north of the 3630 line will all be free. giving free states much larger room to grow in the Louisiana Territory. Next question. Tell 3 facts about McCulloch versus Maryland. 3 facts about McCulloch versus Maryland. We're going to look right here. McCulloch versus Maryland was John Marshall, who favored a strong national government. States did not have more power than the federal government, and states could not regulate interstate commerce. So states in this case do not have more power than the federal government. Give 3 examples of nationalism in this chapter. 3 examples of nationalism would be our country coming up with the one currency, one type of money. A protective tariff in the American system would not be an example of nationalism because it only helps the Northeast. Henry Clay's American system would be an example of nationalism. And us acquiring Florida would be an example of nationalism. Tell me 3 things about Henry Clay's American system. It needs a protective tariff to help American industries, have a national bank to regulate money, and to improve the transportation system of the United States. Explain sectionalism. Sectionalism right here is the loyalty to the interests of your own region or section of the country rather than the interests of the nation as a whole. What was the Monroe Doctrine? It's right here. The Monroe Doctrine said that the Americas were closed to further colonization. It warned that the European efforts to reestablish colonies would be considered dangerous to our peace and safety. Finally, we promised to stay out of European affairs. Ha, like we did that. And what is the era of good feelings? The Federalist Party provided little opposition to Monroe and soon disappeared. Political differences gave way to what a Boston newspaper called the era of good feelings, a time period of very little political problems.